pause up there in the
Okay.
top left.
That's
Provided by Snapshots. We also have some coffee and some bottled water. So please feel free to help yourself to anything that's over there. We are going to go ahead and get started here just for the sake of time. I know that we have a really, really wonderful panel put together this morning. I know a lot of you probably are going to want to engage in this conversation as well. So we are going to welcome questions at the end of the panel discussion. You'll notice that there are a couple things on your tables. You have sheets of paper or little slips of paper that say questions for the panel. So if you think of any questions throughout the course of this conversation, you're welcome to write those down, and we will collect those at the end of our prepared panel discussion, and then we will have the opportunity to ask those of the panelists. Also, if you are not currently on our mailing list to receive updates for our Community Partners Council monthly forums, there are some little slips of paper there as well. You can put your contact info on, and we can add you to our mailing list. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all for coming this morning. My name is Corey Stutes. I'm Community Impact Director at United Way, Licking County. I am so honored to be able to spend my Wednesdays with you, second Wednesday of every month with this Community Partners Council. It takes a lot of effort to put these events together, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank Ashley Washburn, who is the chair of our Community Partners Council, and she represents our fund partners. Thank you, Ashley. We also have Sylvia Friel, Jamie Blackstone, Kirk Hummerhouse is on our committee. We also have Bobby Persinger, but I don't think he was able to make it this morning. So thank you to all of you for the effort that you put in. So without further ado, I would like to get started here. We do want to thank the sponsors of this event, Nationwide, Amgen, Denison, Dutchess, Looking Memorial Health Systems, and Harvey Solar. So those folks have stepped up to sponsor our events throughout the year. So let's give our sponsors a big round of applause. So our panelists are joining us this morning. They have received some prepared questions in advance for the bulk of our panel discussion. And then, as I said, we will be able to open it up to questions from you all at the end. So I would like to introduce our panel. We have Shannon T.L. Isom, who is the president and CEO of the Community Shelter Board in Columbus. We have Stephanie Dunlap, the executive director of Whole Living Recovery, and she also is a case manager with Licking County Reentry Program. We have Deb Dingus, our very own Deb Dingus. She's the executive director at United Way, Licking County. She's also the pastor at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church here in Newark. And then we have Dan Davis. He is the Director of Student Services for Southwest Licking Schools. So let's thank our panelists for coming this morning. All right, so panelists, there is a microphone there on the table. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just pass that around as we ask the questions. But I do want to start off. So as many of you know, Deb has been very active in addressing the needs of the community for many, many years. And this work, as we're talking about today's topic, which is low barrier housing, this work has been ongoing for a long time in Licking County. We know the need is not new. The need for housing in general is not new. And so these are issues that have been addressed by the community at large for a while, and United Way has played a big role in those. So Deb, if you wouldn't mind, would you give some background kind of on the work that has taken place over the last several years to address this topic?
Yeah, probably I got a little more intentional about this work coming out of a community process called the Community Blueprint at the end of 2016. We identified out of a questionnaire of about 360 issues, what the top issues were facing our community then. And out of that, about 35 rose to a little bit deeper dive, and from that, 14 issues rose to the top. One of those certainly was in our primary basic need area of affordable, safe and affordable housing. we have continued as a United Way community to champion and advocate for safe and affordable housing. The issue with visible unsheltered individuals or families was just starting to grow. It was at the same time we also started to see the epidemic, our opioid epidemic, begin to grow in the county. I got the opportunity to spend 50 nights sleeping outside, sometimes sleeping with folks who were unsheltered and having conversations with people who were living on the streets, to build networks and to learn about. And so it was one of those things that I always say people, I was a rafting guide. I'm like, this is where the current is going. And I knew the current was going to go and this was going to continue to be an issue. It was heartbreaking having conversations with folks who were sleeping outside, and sometimes they'd come up to me and they were like, what do you need? What do you need? Here's the best place to pitch your tent. Here's where you can go to the restroom, you know, if I couldn't make it to the nearest bush, right? So after that, our community decided, let's talk about shelters. And at the same time, I've been a pastor in the community. I've worked with United Way and in ministry for over 30 years. And there wasn't really, I don't think, a full awareness of the current of our unsheltered population really growing much outside of Newark at that time. And so we really didn't get traction with getting a low barrier shelter. So then we decided, let's involve the leadership of our community. Let's do a tour. And in fact, we had contacted Shannon's predecessor at that time at the Community Shelter Board, and we took a van over to Columbus to tour the Van Buren Shelter, Maryhaven, to talk with the Community Shelter Board, to meet with City Council reps with Columbus. How did you get this going? We came back and we formed, through a lot of pain and sweat and tears, a group called the Licking County Homelessness Task Force, and our mission was to work on 3 areas. We hired 2 consultants. One consultant was going to focus on the area of affordable housing and a coordinated system of care to address homelessness and housing. And then another consultant was to primarily focus on getting a low barrier shelter. There was a small group that was working with a consultant on the low barrier shelter. The consultant ended the contract with that group at a particular time, and we had a full report to the community, unfortunately, December, January time period during COVID. So a lot of things got put on the table because obviously our efforts and our energy got switched around addressing COVID. It didn't stop the growth, though, however, of our unsheltered population continuing to grow. Several years ago, also, we took a stab at opening a warming shelter. We had a few churches involved several years ago. After a year during the pandemic, Connie Hawk at the time, the director of the foundation, and myself got together to say, let's debrief. How about let's get a ongoing committee in the county to at least work when the temperatures get so, life-threatening cold that we can open things up. We started developing more of that. Our church started opening up the warming shelter on days as well as cooling shelter. And then now for 1.5 years, we've been running a 5-day, 8-hour-a-day drop-in center to help the unsheltered as well. The homeless situation in our community then really started picking up in the last year when we started hearing that there's some ordinances and changes happening as it relates to our unsheltered population. And so we thought it was timely now to call the community back together, and we did that at the end of the last quarter at a forum at the Doubletree, and we had discussions around 5 different areas. We also have partnered now with Microsoft to receive some grant funding so that we can continue the initiative around a couple of these areas. Coordination of services in our community and how we can build a more robust, coordinated effort of services to get our not-for-profits to work together. We have great not-for-profits, but we can improve the way we work together, as well as what do we do immediately with our growing unsheltered population in the area of a low barrier shelter. So it's our hope, with my United Way hat on, with my pastor hat on, as a caring human being, that our community comes together. I believe down deep in my heart that our population is not out of control, that we can't come together, combine resources, and do something immediately. This past Sunday, we sent somebody to the hospital with frostbite all over their hands. We also went into a home. There was an 8-month-old sleeping with no heat in the house, lying there, that we had to call the squad on. At our last warming shelter, we're seeing families. We had a mom, a dad, and a 7-year-old sleep on the cot in our church, working full-time jobs. So the demographic is changing. So I think that's enough, Corey.
Thank you, Deb, for sharing that. Yeah, thank you. So that gives a little bit of background on some of the work that's been being done here by United Way and others in the community over the last several years. But our panelists represent a diverse set of backgrounds and experience. So for our other panelists, would you please briefly share with us just a little bit about the organizations that you represent and how you're working to address housing insecurity or serving those that experience it?
You want to start?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you, first of all, for having me again. This is always a topic that, although it is the current topic that we're talking about, it's a topic that underlies probably every human condition in which we have been dealing with for not only the time such as now, but I would say probably for centuries. The destabilization of housing, which is how I'd like to define it, and then this continuum of how people then move through into truly being unsheltered. Homelessness is what I am solely focused on every day, and that's my job. So I'm the president and CEO of the Community Shelter Board, which is one of 15 unified funding agencies across this nation. The United Funding Agency means that HUD certifies you and accreditates you, that as you apply for dollars, as you compete for dollars with HUD, our federal government, that what they'll do is certify you and say that not only that do you know how to do the auditing and rigor of spending those dollars where needed, but if those dollars are not spent, you don't have to send them back. And that is not only a gift, but a treat for communities to then not only have agency in where their dollars go, but to also be able to plan for any level of agility that's needed within the system. Going back, there's only 15 in the country though that do this. Deb and I have talked, it is possible, it is rigorous, but it is possible. The Community Shelter Board came out of this creative, innovative idea of business leaders. I need to say that because many times it is distilled down that the Community Shelter Board is a nonprofit. And although nonprofits can do this work, nonprofits cannot do this work alone. It is impossible. Amen. So, church board. Sorry about that. So it is impossible. And so I'd like to note that yes, as Deb has called and has talked to us, the Community Shelter Board has been successful, but it has not been successful without the idea, the innovation, and more importantly, the resource leadership of the business community that then walked alongside the government, who is obligated to spend our collective dollars where needed for social issues. Yes. So I need to right-size that as we're moving into this conversation. And then comes benevolence, right? And then comes benevolence. And then benevolence ends up not only spotlighting where there's gaps in the continuum, but then is steadfast about not letting up for any of those people who are philanthropists here, never letting up until it's fixed. And who fixes it? Government and business. Nonprofits fill in the gap until the ends meet, and we must say the ends must meet with housing. Okay, so I'm supposed to say what I do. So that's what I do every day. I'm excited to do it because what else would I be doing, right? But being able to concentrate on those things of the human condition. So we run this unified funding agency that does a couple of things. The first is that we ensure quality within our community, and we ensure that quality through various ways. I'll real quickly talk about that. We have 17 partner agencies, 9 of which are emergency shelters, 5 of which are low barrier emergency shelters where people can move through. And we funded those, and they come back and tell us, as they always do, that there's not enough money shared. And then we go back and figure out from a HUD perspective, 60% of our dollars, our budget, our $68 million budget comes from HUD. And we go back and we scour to see what other dollars we can maximize. The second is that we ensure outcomes, so that versus every nonprofit trying to figure out how do I ensure my own perfect outcome to compete, which ultimately makes you compete against other nonprofits. It allows that outcome to come into a collective unit. And then you get to say our system is optimized through outcomes. So we make sure of that. Is there still interfighting? Yeah. Are there still priorities that want to be above others, even amongst that? Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mitigate that, but what it does do is keep you on the same plane first. So quality, outcomes, and then the third, which I'm really concentrated on, is efficiency. And efficiency could look like, in a lot of ways for nonprofits, is how do I get people through faster? Because the way that the funding is that the more people I see, the more money I get. So if people are in beds longer, I get less money, and it gets to a critical point, a critical day where you start losing money, right? That's all that, we know that. Efficiency is not that for me. Efficiency is, how do I ensure that all those two components, outcomes and quality, work together quickly enough, competitively enough, that I'm able to get more money here? And that's the job. So although we're talking about how to house people, and that's important, the benevolence of it is important, I will be coming from the lens of business. It doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't get a good return when we're not taking care of human beings. Doesn't make business sense. The value proposition just doesn't work. So I'll be speaking from that space.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I work for Whole Living Recovery. We have 5 recovery homes here in Newark, 3 women and 2 men. I also work for reentry, so we do case management. I am a person in recovery as well. I have experienced homelessness. And what we're trying to do, I think, with both organizations, I mainly deal with folks that are justice involved and have addiction problems. So what we're trying to do is give some type of safe place to our folks where they can recover. I spent a lot of time cycling in and out of our county jail with no place to go. So then I would start all over, and I'm on this hamster wheel that I can't get off of. And we fight every day for trying to put people places. They can't go to our shelters because of certain charges or things like that. I mean, so we're tapping into other resources locally for either treatment or hotels, or sometimes we've given people a tent. Because there's just literally no other option for them. And also too, I think if we start viewing this, not necessarily as a problem, but a problem of humanity. I mean, this is a human issue. These are people, they're somebody's family members. Instead of just trying to put it in this box, this is a humanitarian crisis on our doorstep in our community. So I know that I'm going to continue to work with people in our community and try to get these people somewhere safe so then they can start working on rebuilding their lives for whatever reason it is, whether they're justice involved, they have an addiction problem, mental health problem, or because they can't pay their bills because they lost their job. These are human beings, and they deserve not to sleep out in the snow. They deserve not to be, shuffled down the road because nobody wants to see them. They're human beings. So that's what we're doing with the Living Recovery. We're housing folks, so they have that safe place to work, on themselves, and then they can transition out. And then reentry, we're doing the same thing. You know, we're going out of the jail and seeing people. It's the first question that comes out of my mouth. Where are you going when you leave here? And then it goes on to, unfortunately, what charges do you have? And then that helps us navigate where we can send them. But I totally agree with the whole reason that we're here. We need a low barrier shelter. We need somewhere where it doesn't matter what you've done in your past. You need shelter, you need someplace safe, to link with other community resources. It's like, if we focus on the problem will get bigger. If we focus on the solution will get bigger. And I absolutely adore our community. We have wonderful community partners, and I wholeheartedly believe that if we come together, we can figure this out together. So thank you.
I'm just so thankful for both of you already. Just want to say that. So a couple of things. United Way, for the longest time, we've just been known as the fundraiser. We just raise funds and we give them back out, but we certainly do a lot more than that. We pay attention to the issues that are happening in our community. We bring people together, convene people together. We advocate for the issues. And we raise resources, not just dollars. It might be volunteerism resources as well. And we know, though, that Maslow's hierarchy says, I've got to meet my basic needs first. Every social scientist will tell you this. Right? I've got to meet my basic needs first. I have to have food as a human being. I have to have sleep. It's non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. And we also know that, when you're struggling and you're insecure with those basic needs, well, then you can't do much in front of you. You really can't. I can't get that 7-year-old out of my head who slept on the cot in our basement. I don't know, but he got a good night's sleep with 37 people, 2 dogs and a cat in a church basement. And then transit, thanks God, we got this little fellow over to Cherry Valley Elementary the next day. How well did he do in school the next day? Right? We have to sleep and we have to eat. We are human beings. Human beings are not like objects. We're not machines. We can't just throw people away. A low barrier shelter, I think, acknowledges the fact that we cannot have a throwaway society. No one is disposable. No one. And we need a place where people are rested up, feel safe and secure, so that they then can get connected with the resources that they need. And that might be mental health counseling. That might be substance use disorder help or treatment. That might be financial literacy or help getting into the workplace. It might be all of those things. Or it might be, I just need a place right now because, I'm already working a full-time job. My husband and I are working a full-time job. But, we were renting a house, as the story of this kid. We were renting a house for 7 years, and now the rent was increased by $400. I can't afford it. We've got to have beds. There's no reason. We've got so many big buildings, so many financial resources in this community. There is no reason that we don't have a place that people can't lay their head down. Period.
First off, Dan Davis, Director of Student Services from Southwest Lincoln Schools. Part of my role is we call it in schools, the McKinney-Vento liaison. So McKinney-Vento is the federal law that basically shows the diagram for schools and how we treat students who are experiencing homelessness. And it's what governs schools' decisions on what school a kid might go to. Let's say if they were attending New York City schools and became homeless and they're now living in a double-up apartment in Southwest Lincoln Schools. So I oversee that process along with special education and other things in the district. First off, just again, I feel even more confident with addressing homelessness after hearing these ladies speak this morning. The enthusiasm, the knowledge that you guys have is already very apparent, so I appreciate that. Again, perspective of myself, and I'll try to relate most of my answers to a school perspective. So each school district in Licking County in the state of Ohio has a McKinney-Vento liaison, so a homelessness liaison. And so usually it's somebody like me who runs another department like special education. For bigger districts, maybe 10 to 15,000, they have someone solely dedicated to that spot. But for most districts in Licking County, it's going to be one of our other duties as assigned amongst our job. And so when we talk about resources, resources for the school district do not come in a significant manner for homelessness. We do get some titles and federal funding, and it's about $10,000 for a district our size. Our district is pretty good, or pretty big. We are out on the western side of Licking County. Sometimes people forget we exist out there, but we have about over 5,000 students now in Southwest Licking schools. So some people know us more of our high school, Watkins Memorial High School. And then just to the west of us, we have Licking Heights School District as well. And so I think it's also important when we talk about low barrier housing, we're focused on the county as a whole. You know, it's great to have low barrier housing for Newark or for more populated areas. But when we talk about low barrier housing and keeping kids in their school district, we need it in every school district in the county. So one of the biggest disruptions that you can have for a student is to pluck a third grade student who's been attending the same school district for 3 or 4 years. And in the middle of the year, their housing is lost and you're going to place them in a different school district where they don't know people, mom and dad are under significant distress. And so anytime where we can create those options in a school district to keep kids in the district, that's definitely preferable. One of the things we do as a district is if a student does experience homelessness, and let's use my example from earlier, if they're displaced from Newark City schools and they find themselves living in Southwest Licking schools, typically the school districts will work to keep that student attending the district they were attending if possible. So part of the McKinney-Vento requirements are is the district figure out a transportation plan to keep the student attending the district they were. Now, what will happen sometimes with that is the parent will then say, well, no, I just want my kid to go here because they're going to have an 1.5-hour bus ride to the other district. I'm sure you guys have heard of the transportation issues that school districts have had over the past few years and the lack of bus drivers and an already squeezed resource trying to now send kids to all different districts. Sometimes out of the county, we just had a student who was displaced from Canal Winchester into our district, and the team decided that their best placement would continue to be to attend Canal Winchester. Then you have the challenge of trying to get a student to Canal Winchester in the morning and in the afternoon. And then they also have a sibling who has different school times, who starts an 1.5 hours later. And so you can see in just one case how many difficulties that presents to a school district with already tight resources and no extra funds for that. So the more housing options we can get spread throughout the community, I think from my perspective would be huge to student stability. But again, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate again the opportunity to be on the panel, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, panelists. Again, we are so fortunate to have you because we wanted to really make sure it's so easy for the topic of what's happening in Licking County to become a topic of what's happening in Newark. But Licking County is so big. And so having your representation from the western part of the county, you also have a very unique perspective. Although you work with students, seeing, you know, how the changes are in the population of people who are experiencing housing insecurity, or those who are homeless. And so we're very grateful to have you on the panel. Thank you to all of our panelists for that. So for the sake of time, I think I'm going to condense the next couple of questions. So last October, we held a community conversation on housing. Several of you were there. It was attended by over 180 community members. We had a very robust conversation, and after reviewing the responses to those questions that we asked, we noted that low barrier sheltering was the most commonly repeated theme throughout all of those responses on every question. That was the #1 thing that was written down the most, and that came up in those conversations. However, attendees noted that while there was a significant need for that. There are many barriers that make that difficult, such as securing an available building, getting funding. There were safety concerns expressed, as well as a lot of public stigma. So to our panelists, talking specifically about low barrier sheltering, what is that? What does that mean? And how might we address some of those barriers if we were to establish a low barrier shelter in Lincoln County? I know that's a lot, so my apologies.
Okay. That is a lot. What is a low barrier?
So yeah, what is a low
a
barrier shelter, and how might we kind of get over some of those barriers to establishing one?
Establish one, okay, so, I believe the question is why Licking County needs a low barrier shelter. When I move through decision making, I like to actually start with the threat if you don't do it. So what happens if you just don't? And then start there. It's hard to convince someone who doesn't believe you need it in starting with the why. Because good people, and most people are good people, they get the why. What we're not addressing is the why not, or the ramifications of what happens if we have one. So as someone who's not from this community, I can be a little bit more analytical potentially about the decision. The decision then goes on, what happens if you don't do it? What happens if you don't allow people who have multiple reasons of why they move through the destabilization of housing, which in itself, 10, 20, 30 years ago would not necessarily mean that they needed a shelter space. Why? There's a couple of things that have happened while homelessness has increased. We still believe, when we were in the assumption and the knowledge of understanding that we had a lot of resources, that the archetype of homelessness, right, the picture of homelessness for people who were not doing what they needed to do to thrive. And by the way, that may have been appropriate. I don't think it was, but it may have been appropriate because we had plenty of housing. We had plenty of manufacturing jobs. We had plenty of people that were the middle class. We had plenty of families who had extra bedrooms and couches. And so the archetype probably was appropriately aligned for the time. What we're failing to do, again, just from a business sense, is that we're failing to look at the assumptions in which we built this on and seeing if those assumptions are still appropriate for today. It is imperative, government and business leaders, as you do with your budget, look at your assumptions and making sure that those assumptions are aligned to the metrics, the factors, the headwinds, the market forces of today. Here's what today shows us. Today shows us that more people pick Central Ohio region to live than anywhere else in the state of Ohio. We are the fastest growing. The Central Ohio is the fastest growing, not only in the state of Ohio, but we're ranked, depending on what indices you look at, in the top 5 in the nation. Crazy, who thought of that of Ohio? But here we are, right? For any of us who've grown up here, you used to fly through the middle of Ohio because you wanted to get to the borders of wherever you were going or to another state. That assumption no longer exists. Just doesn't exist. Number 2 is that Ohio was built on manufacturing. Columbus was not, but the rest of Ohio was. Columbus has never really had a manufacturing community. In fact, for some of you who've grown up here, it's actually a pretty young city in comparison to the rest of the state. Well, now across the entire state, that manufacturing, the Toledos, the Cincinnatis, the Clevelands, and the Daytons, Akron, gone. And so now we have more people coming in and not enough job alignment. Third is that in 2008, the entire country, I just like to say it like this so people can understand it, caught cancer in housing. the entire country, not just us, the entire country. And when you're dealing with cancer, for any of you all who know what the level of sickness that does, you can recover, but you may not recover back to what you used to be. That's where we are. And Ohio is no different than the rest of this country. The difference that we had in the assumptions of Ohio, though, is that we had more people coming in than what we did in 2008. So now, there's two major indices that will tell you, are you contributing to homelessness? Two, a community, a region. Are you contributing to homelessness based on two indices, and they are an and versus an or. The first is that, are your rents going up higher than what they used to be across maybe a decade? Not only are ours, but ours are ranked number 2, number 3, and going up across this country. And for Licking County too, no different. So we have that. If you look over at at the numbers in Franklin County, what we notice is that the nation itself is starting to heal a little bit, soften in the market with the amount of rents that are going up. We are not. Okay, that's what's first. Now here's the and. The other and is, if you're not building enough housing, then you don't have enough vacancies. I don't know what Licking County is, but they say that if you're under 4%, your community is actually contributing to homelessness if you're under 4% vacancy. Franklin County is at 320. I don't know what you all say, but I would probably say that if you're seeing an increase of homelessness, you have an and statement versus an or statement now. So this is less about, right, can we be good to people? It is that. But I'm really talking from a business sense. There's an assumption problem that needs to be realigned. And so the low barrier question is a good one, but I would say, what happens if you don't do it and your rents go up and you don't have enough housing? What will then it predict that we will project that it will look like in 5 years? And then what other nonprofits must come up? What other subsidy must come up? What other in-kind dollars, what other philanthropic contribution dollars must come up? Because in 3 to 5 years, you're going to have a different population than the resources that you had before took care of. There's no other way around that from a business sense. So you're gonna have to decide, am I going to do it this way, or are we going to do it this way? And I think that's a good question. But you get to decide that. I would say that there must be a low barrier shelter in between, because our winters are colder. And the number one reason why any Midwest community has shelters, the number one reason, public health, the number one reason is because people die. Okay, that's a fact. People die. That's national. That's the number one reason in the Midwest and in the northern communities that don't have shelters, they die. We have tons of them, and we still see 23 to 25 deaths. Okay. So once you move through the facts, I think a low barrier shelter works for communities that are thriving and growing, who have a different economic challenge than what they had before, less resources to allocate, because people must have a way to land. Low barrier means this, and then I'll pass it over. Low barrier means, and you've heard it, I'll say it, I've said it before in the other meeting, that you don't have to prove your dignity to walk through my door. You do not have to prove your worth to walk through my door. That's the low barrier. That's not everyone's ministry. But if it is somebody's ministry, then you must have it.
This got me thinking, when Living Recovery opened in 2017, I think one of the neighbors actually threatened to go to the county or something. She was very upset that we were putting a recovery home next to her house. And today she's like one of our biggest supporters. She donates, she brings Christmas cookies over because we did it the right way. I believe in recovery housing world, that's not in my backyard, I think is what they call it. So what we strive to do with that organization is run it right, follow policies, good neighbor policies, things like that. I feel certain, with the amount of people in this room and the community partners, that we can come together to figure out some type of solution for our homeless population here in Licking County. I got to thinking, nobody is going to come and do it for us. Nobody is going to save us, so it is up to us, as citizens of Licking County, if nothing else, than to figure out a solution, for our neighbors, for our unsheltered neighbors, and that's what they are. So, there's obviously going to be a stigma, we work with stigma every day. But if we continue to have conversations, if we continue to do things like this, continue to talk about it, continue to bring awareness to it, I feel we'll make a movement. We'll make a movement. If we stop talking about it, if we stop doing things like this, if we stop bringing attention to it, then it will go away, and those folks will pass, from the elements of, the weather. So we've got to continue fighting, to be able to treat them like human beings.
So somewhere along the line, the last several years too, I got involved with a number of task forces with Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and sat on the task force for the homelessness strategy for a few years. And as Shannon said, it's not an either or. So what I want to say is that Licking County is wonderful. We are blessed with economic growth compared to many communities that are shuttering up. We are in a booming area in Ohio and in the nation, and it's wonderful to see the economic opportunities that are coming our way. And the economy continues to struggle with inflation, and yes, we have not recovered from the housing crisis of 2008, and so our housing stock is not adequate for the growth that this community is experiencing now and will continue to experience now. We need to do multiple things at the same time. It's not a this or that. We need a robust contribution to an affordable housing trust that will build more affordable housing, and we need also to develop permanent supportive housing for people who need that extra help, people who are in populations where they need support permanently, whether they're a senior, whether they're somebody with a disability, somebody who needs additional help. And we need to focus on a robust system approach, not a competitive, not-for-profit. One of the things that I've seen working with United Way over the years when people come and apply for funding is this competition. And I hear from one organization over here, we do this, and I hear from another organization, we do this, and then I hear from over, we do this. Sometimes there's duplication of services. Why can't we develop a system where we all say, we do this really well, you do this really well, you do this really well, and then collectively garner the support that we need? It would be hard work, but it's possible. As I've been having conversations with Shannon, what would that look like? I will tell you, there's a couple of other communities in Ohio where that continuum is happening in that way. We could do that if there is the will, and we're all willing to put aside some of our own organizational self-interests. We need to think beyond, I always say, think beyond our lifetime, get out of our lifetime bias. Think of the generations coming down. If we don't do something now with the growth that is happening, this is not an option. It will happen. You will see Our unsheltered street population of people continue to explode. The projections are looking, I think, what was it, Shannon, 68%? We could see an growth, an unsheltered population
By 2028.
by 2028. 68% by 2028. We have been touting this for the last several years. We've got to get ahead of this now. I sat at a MORPC meeting and someone who had come over from the West Coast said, you are where we are in California 25 years ago, and if you don't do something in the next 5 years, that's where you'll be. So if you don't want to be that, here's another, motivator. If we don't want to be that, which we are trending there, we have people sleeping in their cars, working full-time jobs now in Licking County. If we don't want to be that, then let's do something about it. And it's not one or the other areas. We need people now to focus on all of those components of addressing this system everywhere from a low barrier shelter up to affordable housing at all price points. We can't just focus on one of those. All of those have got to be simultaneously worked on at the same time. And some of us are better at some of those areas than others. It doesn't have to be a competition, but it's got to be an agreement that we're going to move toward working together and focusing on what each of us does best. The low barrier piece is a critical component in that continuum of care until we can get somebody in that affordable housing, until we can get them into permanent supportive housing, until they have access to use a voucher that they get, right? We have people who have vouchers. There's no place for them to go. Until we can get them, can't we at least give them a bed so they don't keep spiraling and getting worse, right? It's like any health problem. If I don't address it, is it gonna get better? It's gonna get worse. This is a human health, basic health condition. And a low barrier shelter at least gives us an opportunity to start addressing the disease that we are facing.
I think it's a good point when we talk about the many different issues in the county. When we talk about mental health, we talk about drug addiction, your resources are asked to go a lot of different places. Housing, lack of stable housing, I would say is a common denominator for almost any of those. When we have a student, because we in the school deal with the symptoms of low barrier housing. We don't deal with the actual housing issue. We deal with the symptoms that creates. So when we have a student come into the district who has had to move from house to house or district to district, generally that student is going to not be engaged in learning. Their mind is going to be on flight or fight. Where am I going to lay my head? Am I going to be here for 2 weeks? Am I going to be here for the rest of the school year, hopefully? Am I going to make a friend? When we kind of put it down to think about your own kids and having, and their mindset would be, how would it feel to have your own kid pulled from their comfort of their home and then the comfort of their friend group, the comfort of their schools, their teachers, and then we expect them to score decent on a state test or follow directions. We have so much symptoms that come from the lack of housing, whether it's behavior, mental health, drug addiction in schools. There's so much symptomatic things that come from this issue. I was thinking about my own personal history. I think the bio says it too. My wife and I have fostered in Licking County for several years, and a common denominator for the students we were fostering is a lack of stable housing. Now, generally that came with other symptoms as well, but stable housing was a significant piece of that. The three kids that we ended up adopting out of the foster care system, their mom was a foster child and aged out of the system into no housing. Okay, and so that cycle repeated itself. So when we talk about, we can go a lot of different ways. Stable housing eliminates a lot of those other things. It eliminates the need to find a friend group. It eliminates the need to make an impression in school that's going to get me in trouble that then leads to X, Y, and Z. And so I think it's really, whoever mentioned it here, I think Shannon, maybe you mentioned at the beginning that the focus on housing needs to be very strong. You're pulled again a lot of different ways, but that common denominator of unstable housing leading to all these other symptoms is really significant.
I'm gonna, I think just Corey, just, we were talking about why or how do we do this. Another key statistic that we need to realize today, that current climate in Licking County is 39% of Licking County, 39%, this just came out of the Alice report, is living paycheck to paycheck. 39%. That's more than 1 of every 3 people in Licking County is one flat tire away, could be homeless. When we did our studies and our statistics, and Dan just reminded me of this, and we looked at the average age of a homeless person in Licking County, it is 9 years old. 9 years old. Why? Because we have families who don't have a permanent house. They're moving from their car to a hotel, to aunt and uncle, as Dan is sharing with you. You don't see these people necessarily sleeping on the streets because they are being in the hotels and aunts and uncles and grandparents. I have 3 kids. We have set bedtime routine. You got your little sippy cup, you got your teddy bear, you got tucked in, you got a story time, and you are safe and secure, and you could depend on what was going to happen the next day. When you have a 9-year-old who doesn't know, as Dan said, where they're going to wake up, what they're going to eat, where they're going to be, how do you face the rest of the world? I'll never forget the superintendent we had in Newark who said he ran into a student, they got into a fight, and he said, we got evicted from our home last night. My dad's in jail. I don't give a flying F where the teacher wants me to put a comma in the sentence.
All right, thank you. So we've talked a lot throughout this conversation about some of the changes that we have seen in housing in Central Ohio, some of the changes that we've seen in the number of people who are experiencing, whether it is a risk to the stability of their housing, whether they are completely unsheltered. And a lot of us in the room work in social services to some degree, so we know every day we are fighting stigma, largely stigma of mental illness, stigma of substance use, stigma of housing insecurity. And so I'm going to jump down here because I think one of the big questions that a lot of people, whether they're familiar with what's happening in housing or not, there's a common question that comes up and some topics that are often conflated. So for decades, there's been a debate, even on a national level, about whether a housing first approach or a treatment first approach is the best model to use when aiding people who are unhoused and use substances. Substance use is often the first concern that a lot of people express when they share reasons why they might not support a low barrier shelter. We certainly hear that a lot in our community, and that topic comes up in every community. So when we're addressing low barrier sheltering in general, what's some advice maybe that you could provide on how we might handle that conversation? In your experience, maybe what is a good approach to use? How do you think is the best way for us to handle that, even if it's just through conversation?
So my personal experience and opinion, housing first. Is it possible? Sure, but not probable. I kept running into this. I would go to jail, I would get out, no housing, I would use, I would go back to jail. So just back and forth, back and forth. So I needed someplace stable. I needed to be taken out of that toxic environment and put in somewhere safe. So I could start learning how to live again, how to eat again, how to make my bed again, how to take a shower. You know, hygiene is an issue when you are unsheltered. So it's got to be a safe environment, a stable environment, because it's on so many levels of being able to treat folks' mental health, their substance use disorder. And that's what we always always said about recovery housing, like, we're giving these people, no matter what's going on in the world out there, we're giving them a safe place to come back to. Someplace where they can feel, I remember, I'm like, I can't believe I live here, after being out on the streets for so long. I'm like, I can't believe I live in this recovery house. So it was just someplace safe. And again, like I mentioned before, unfortunately, there's always going to be stigma around this. It's the nature of the beast. But what we can do as a community and as leaders is have these conversations, have a plan, have a follow through. And I hope someday we're sitting here and we've got a low barrier shelter and we're talking about how wonderful we're running it. Because I know we can do it. It's not impossible. They're doing it in other counties. So it's not an impossible thing to do. So I wholeheartedly believe that we can get this accomplished if we work together, as a team with all these different viewpoints and everybody's bringing different experience to the table. I believe we can do it.
When having a little bit of advice for having the discussion around those issues that are 100% conflated with housing. Right? It is interesting when you're talking about housing, then we very, very quickly talk about mental health, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and a myriad of other issues that, by the way, we had when we had plenty of housing. You understand? Okay, we had all those issues when we had housing. And yet, we sit in this conversation conflating the two as if one is the predication of losing the other. It is not. Why do I know that? Because I lived in a time, come from a family, generational poverty. I come from generational poverty, where both of my grandfathers were chronic alcoholics, had jobs, and had a home. Understand? So this idea that somehow we've gotten this new way of being is not the truth. It's not true. So I would tell you the first thing is to remind people maybe of where they've come. And although we want to harken back to the times when they were great, maybe there's a few of you who know that times can be great and you had mental illness. We did. We had it. Drug addiction. Oh, we did. We had it. Teen pregnancy. Oh, we did. We had it. And alcoholism in the community, by the way, with family homes. Okay, I remember those times. So that's first, just remind people that that's a distracting conversation to not solve the issue. The second is that we've also, just to be clear, we've also have lost during those times when we had all that within the family and still had housing. We also had a healthcare system that responded to mental health. Okay, we've lost that. I don't know if Licking County has lost that. Many communities have lost the ability to respond to mental health. The other thing that we've lost, and I think some of you are of age that you can remember this, the third thing you could talk about is that the government is out of being the developer of housing for the frail, the elderly, the widow, and the orphan. Do you all remember that? We used to have this thing, and it was a conversation then, but then we were all behind it in the 60s where we said we will have, and the FDR said we will have a benefit called Medicare. We're going to care for the elderly and the frail, the veteran. That's care. Those that are disabled. And then we're going to aid the orphan and the widow. We're going to aid children. Not that we've conflated this to moms with a whole bunch of babies. We're going to aid children. And that children should not be homeless. We used to all believe in that. I don't care what side you were on. We used to all believe in that. And then we've let this narrative somehow create differently. And there's no doubt about it. If you are a person that is moving through homelessness, a child moving through homelessness, which is the #1 demographic moving through homelessness, you will be an adult that moves through homelessness. And there used to be a time when we didn't believe that that was a reflection of our values. It used to be. I don't know what happened, but we used to all agree on that. And then lastly, another just nugget to help in the conversation. The number one antidote to drug addiction and mental health, the number one antidote is housing. Number one.
Thank you.
Drug addiction, alcoholism is a health issue. It's a disease. I just get a little sniffle and I want to go crawl under the covers and stay home for a little bit, right? That's not me having paranoid, visions and feeling like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. So I've never been a drug addict. I don't know. We have people in our community who are experts in that area. But how many of you, if you get a cold, want to go home and crawl under the covers and take some NyQuil, some DayQuil, and just rest? Just rest. How can we expect people to address a chronic health condition when they don't even have the opportunity to rest, to get better? So if we look at it like a health issue, whether it's a sniffle, a cold, COVID, but we treat alcoholism, we always say it's a choice, it's a choice. Well, we have choices how we treat our diabetes, yes, we do, but we have treatment available. And we want diabetics to get their rest, right? We have got to treat alcoholism and addiction as a disease and provide for the basic health care needed, which is a bed, period.
This is driving me crazy.
I'll be brief on my reply for this one, just addressing the stigma in schools. On our pathway to establish more low barrier housing for Licking County. In the meantime, something that you can practically do to take away the stigma from our kids who are currently experiencing homelessness is to partner with your local school district for things like shoes, not $9 shoes, but maybe the popular shoes. Okay, maybe a jacket that a kid likes, maybe some new clothing that the kid likes. We work with a lot of churches in Southwest Licking schools who partner with us to provide different things like that. And it's great to get things, but sometimes when you get something from an organization and it's the cheapest there is, and then you put that on the kid who's already wearing the worst clothes, the 5-year-old shoes, it's things like making them feel a part of the school district. They can fit into with peers. So reaching out to your local school district, hey, what can I do? And bringing up some of these ideas so that kids can actually take one more thing away from that stereotypical approach where they're already trying to make friends and, maybe they haven't bathed in a few days. So giving them some new quality items that make them fit in can relate to peers and cut down some of that stigma in schools.
Great, thank you. And I think that's actually a perfect time to remind all of you of our hygiene hub as well. So hygiene supplies are often quite expensive, difficult to come by, and we have been able to expand our hygiene hub. I think we're now in 7 high schools. We do have a goal of being in every high school. Are we also at CTEC? Hygiene hub at CTEC? Okay, yeah. So we are working to establish those. So you are welcome to donate, whether it's actual hygiene supplies, funds to purchase hygiene supplies so that we can keep those stocked. Our Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service what are we collecting for that?
Blankets and hand warmers.
Blankets and hand warmers. I know we have a sock drive that we collect stocks for. So if you're wanting to be able to donate some of those items that then can be given out to schools or wherever, please feel free to reach out to us. Just needed to give that little plug. So we've had a very robust conversation around this topic, but in a practical sense, if we are going to establish a low barrier shelter, what do we need to do right now to do that? In your expert opinions.
Well, I'll say a few things. First of all is, we have to believe that low barrier shelter is a part of the continuum of care of a housing system and needed. We have to believe that. We need the partnership from our elected officials, as well as our corporate partners. Our not-for-profits are doing a fantastic job. We have so many great not-for-profits in the community. But I think, Shannon said, it cannot just be the not-for-profits. We need to look for a facility, a structure that would be suitable, and we will need some support from our corporate partners, as well as the collaboration and the partnership of our elected officials and municipalities to do this. It has to be not just one sector, it has to be everybody working together. And even with that, volunteerism. So everything from volunteers on up to those corporate continued sustained dollars will be needed. And as well as our not-for-profits who will provide services through that low barrier shelter to help people with the health and the healing that they need, and whatever that looks like. But I implore our communities to really don't just dismiss this conversation. Don't come to this conversation and not be willing to learn, and not be willing to be open to, maybe I'm living with an idea or a vision about homeless people that doesn't fit with where we are today. We need that. It is an opportunity to have that conversation. And then the practical pieces of a low barrier shelter will be a location, a facility, continued funding support from corporate partners, public-private commitment, as well as from our government. And then you're going to need qualified people to oversee that facility and participate in the continuum of housing care in our community. Those are the practical pieces. I certainly am not the expert on this. Shannon's obviously more the expert on this, but in the conversations and with the numerous of people that I have talked to who have worked in these areas, those are some of the pieces.
I also think what we can do is continue the conversation beyond this room. We can be talking to our neighbors, our family members, our friends, and then ask them, hey, talk to your neighbors, your friends. We have to keep this going. We have to keep the conversation going. You never know. It's crazy. We put posts out on Facebook asking for certain things for clients. I'm like, we're never going to get that. And we get it, So it's like, if we don't try, we won't know. So we just got to keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Just to add for some more just pragmatism on how to get this started, I would say to start with a SWOT analysis. Start with just assessing for the community. And I would encourage this community that as you move through a SWOT analysis, move through those diversity of voices that believe that this is a threat or that it would weaken this community, and then write those out. As you move through the assessment, I would also look for those things that are evidence-based. And so what do we already have as a proven track record across this country? And then matching it with the community that you already have. So it's important not necessarily to look at Franklin County as being the model, but instead looking at other rural communities that are made up with the same type of demographic and leadership that you have. We want this to be successful. Finally, I'd say do a visit, not finally, but also do a feasibility study. That's just, is the money here? Is the will here? Are there other outside sources that would also contribute to a community that looks like this and has market that also looks like this? I would then say put together an interdisciplinary team, and that interdisciplinary team should have people that believe that this is not the right answer. And then that interdisciplinary team and then that coalition continues to assess itself and evaluate if this is still continuing to be the right answer based on potentially moving market forces. I think that interdisciplinary coalition can also do the strategy and think about capital. I think it's also important to involve the state house. There are people at the state that care very, very deeply about rural communities and communities that are changing in demographic. And I think there's a lot, if someone has that level of expertise, you could probably get a lot of advocacy there to help move along. And then pilot, I think it should be small. I think it should be defined. And then everyone should come around saying, when is this going to begin? And then when is it going to end for assessment? And then finally, if it's something that the pilot is successful and then you get to tweak some things, you can then think about sustainability. And then what does that look like? And that might look like a different coalition that started it, that has been continuing.
All right, thank you for that. I do want to remind everyone, if you have questions for our panelists, hopefully you've taken some time to write those down. So if you do have questions that are prepared, if you want to hold those up, we'll come around and collect those. In the meantime, while we're collecting those, I did have one that came up early, and I think it's a pretty good question. So someone did already ask, how should the city of Newark, the government itself, the city of Newark, how should the city work to help addressing homelessness?
Are you asking?
Anyone? It's open to anyone?
I think, first of all, continued dialogue with those who are in the service around ways that we can partner together. Our hope is that as we, now we do have an ordinance, and as we address, ways that we can help people get into services who are unsheltered, maybe after they get to the justice system. Just as robust attempts to do that, we hope that all cities would participate in collaborative conversation about how we can prevent homelessness and be a part of addressing the issue so that it doesn't continue to get worse. I really believe that would go a long way. So I would like to see the city sit and be a part of these ongoing discussions and agree to stick with us, Be in a relationship means, we don't always agree, that's okay. But we continue to sit at the table together with the end goal of we're going to help address this issue and make people's lives better who are struggling with housing in our community.
All right. Okay, anyone else? Anybody else? Okay. All right, Shannon, this question was directed to you. One of the issues that seem to continue to come up in conversations is data, specifically data about how many people are impacted. We need to collect the data and share it. In your experience, who does that or does it best in Central Ohio or Columbus?
Well, I'm gonna say we do it best. But I'm gonna tell you why I think we do it best. I do think data is very important, both quantitative and qualitative information informs you, and people use both every day as they do information. So I do think data is really important, but I'm gonna tell you the experience of Community Shelter Board. We had a third-party assessor come in, and it was funded, this third-party assessor came in and was funded by Franklin County Commissioners, the business partnership called the Columbus Partnership, and then the city of Columbus. And they put together a pretty good bolus of money, brought in an assessor, a contractor, to review the readiness of our system. And what they found is a couple of things that they found first, and it was pretty quickly, that we have a lot of data. And then when we knew that, but when then they connected it to HUD, what they found, and we didn't even know this, is that we're ranked #1 across the country for how excellent the data is. So that is important. The data is so good, and we didn't know that we were ranked #1, but what we did know is that when HUD comes out with competitive dollars, not only do we always get them, but because we spend them well, it allows us to get even more dollars. So data is important. And we do it really well. And that's not because of me, that's because of some really, really smart people that do nothing but data and analytics. But here's the third thing that I was interested in as a leader, is the same third party said, your data is so good, but you have so much of it that it compares to urban communities like San Diego, LA, and New York, big metropolitan communities. And so as I was still patting myself on the back, they said, no, that's not a good thing for the size of your community. What it tells us is that you're collecting data more than you're assessing the issue. And so there is this data neutralization where you believe that analyzing data is doing the work. It is not. That's where we are. That's where my leadership comes in. So data is important. There's models of how to do data. And in fact, there's not only capacity dollars for doing data, but you can actually call HUD and they can do technical assistance around that. There's a lot of resources that we don't think about around data. If you're committed to doing that, I've told this to Deb, we can figure out how to give you enough resources to get that done. What I would caution you, where you have your own agency, is once you're clear first of what data you need, and when you get it, that you trust you have it, so that you can move into action.
All right, thank you. This next question is specifically for Stephanie. Stephanie, could you describe in a little bit more detail the good neighbor policies that you have at Living Recovery? You said you did it right to win over your neighbors who were concerned. How did you do that?
So like I said, we have good neighbor policies in place, and what that means is we're good neighbors, so we don't have the police getting called to the house. We're not playing loud music. We keep the yard clean. We keep the house picked up outside. We're good neighbors. We strive to be everything that you would think of as a good neighbor. You know, we're conscientious of the folks around the neighborhood. You know, we do things for the neighborhood. So, I mean, like I said, I've had neighbors come up to us and say, you guys are better neighbors than other people that just live here, you know, down the road. So it's just those things that we strive to be.
I'm going to piggyback on it, just on my other hat. We've been running a drop-in center now for a year and a half. And what we have found now is that when you have a good neighbor policy, your neighbors join the mission. So when we activate, our neighbors roll out the garbage cans for us. Our neighbors have been coming over shoveling the walks. Our neighbors are saying, hey, I heard you're going to do this. Do you need this? And they jump in and join the mission as well.
All right, thank you. Someone asked, and this was another, in the conversation that we had in October, this was one of the things that people did mention as barriers to low barrier shelters or shelters in general. So this is something that's on the minds of many people in the community. The question is, how is security handled at a low barrier shelter? And how significant of a concern should that be?
It's handled in a lot of different ways. You need it. No other way around it. But it really does depend on the operator. I have an operator right now in our warming centers that we have a warming center. What we did was a strategy to try to align community back back into benevolence. And so as I walked into the community 2 years ago, and I don't know if you've all heard of Van Buren. Van Buren is a shelter that is in Franklin County that has on average about 450 people there, 257 children at all times. In the winter, we expand up to a little over 800, maybe at times 840. This third party said that there's never been ever, they've never seen it, a shelter over 257 beds. We had 840. You don't want to be a community like that. So when I'm telling you to have folks that disagree, those are the things that you'll hear that you may not think about. Right? What happens if this thing gets bigger? What are we going to do? So came up with this strategy of I have to make this footprint, this big, massive shelter. I got to make this footprint smaller. More than anything, how can anybody have healthy mental health with 800 people around them? And how can our babies go to school with 800 people around them? It is impossible. So I had to make that footprint smaller. And so what I was thinking is that, gosh, we push all these people into the shelter and take them out of community, take them out of people that they love and they know. And whether you all know people's names, you recognize the pattern of people, you get to know people in your community. And so we know best, is that communities know how to do benevolence. They do benevolence through a million of ways. They do it through churches and civic groups. They do it through people who recognize each other on the corner and in stores. People give away things to folks that they recognize. So it is imperative that we take this central entity of a shelter and then bring it back to community. So warming centers were the way to do it. We have one particular community that with the warming centers, and we also allow pets. I want you all to hear that. We allow pets. It's the number one reason why women don't go into a shelter is because of pets. So the number one reason why people don't get off the land, they would rather be outside. You say, how could people rather be outside? They'd rather be outside because if they have a pet, they don't want to lose their pet. So we let pets come in. And so we have a diversity of low barrier shelters that have 2 security people at all times. We have low barrier shelters that use what they call staff crisis reactors. And they don't use the word security at all, but that's what they do. And then we have others who have, and it is a strategy, a lot of men that work for them that allows themselves to have the presence and the affirmation of kind of maleness, if you're allowing me to say this. And then because they know the people within the community, they know how to speak to them. So security is an issue, but I want to also open it up that is diverse, and it becomes the answer for whatever your particular community is. What I want to say is it's imperative that we don't police homelessness. I want to mention that. It is imperative we don't police homelessness.
It came up early on when we started growing the warming shelters. You know, what are we going to do if people come in high? What are we going to do if they have pets? And we just opened up and we said, okay, there is no requirement. You can come in to the warming shelter. We've housed dogs, cats, kids, someone who is 83. You come in as you are. People who are actively high have come in to our shelter. We do provide the volunteers some de-escalation training, but also they help take care of each other. And it's also the atmosphere of, you've got to be chill. You've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable and present that kind of an atmosphere and set the tone. And now this will be our 6th year. We have never had an issue that I've had to call the police because there's been any sort of issue, ever. 7 years now. We've never had to do that. I've had to call the squad over people who've had medical health issues. We had somebody who came in who had just been stabbed. We called the squad. We had somebody who had severe frostbite. We called the squad. We had somebody who has heart attack. We called the squad. We had this last Sunday, I followed a person down the street and found an 8-month-old in a diaper in the house, and we called a squad. But it's a non-anxious presence. Goes a long way.
All right, thank you. Anybody else have anything to add on that? And this final question, Deb, I believe that this is referring to when you were talking about building a coordinated system where organizations can find what they do best and kind of work in that vein. So I think that this is just more for clarification. Someone asked, how would we maintain consumer choice if we develop specialist organizations? So in my interpretation, what you were saying, that's not necessarily for the outward-facing services that someone, an individual might go to that organization for, if I understand the question correctly. But just to kind of clarify that, what you were saying, finding people that do what they do best.
We have a number of not-for-profits, and we have some not-for-profits who, there is duplication of services. We have some not-for-profits that are better than others in their areas of specialty. But what I will tell you, we could have the potential to garner more dollars as a collective than we do individually, and we are leaving untapped potential dollars on the table with partnering with corporations and other donors and being competitive in grants by not working collectively and developing a collective system. It's hard work, but we're still small enough that I think that that's something that we can do. And I think that's vital going forward. I hear from donors, it's just hard. Who am I going to give to? Who's going to monitor? Who's collecting the data? How do we have a point of entry into the system? How are we making sure people aren't, cycling through and chronic, being chronic? We cannot do away with homelessness, period. But we can do better at addressing chronic homelessness by working together. We can do more together than separately. I don't know if that's answering the question. I'm open to whoever asked the question, clarifying.
And just as a quick marker, and maybe I hope encouragement, is that the more partners that we bring on, what it looks like from kind of an income and a balance sheet is that I have more money that I have to give out. What has ended up happening is that in the last 8 years, we have added 87 programs because we've added more partners. And because of that, we've actually doubled our income. So I'm noting that because there's something about this energy of people that really actually doesn't give scarcity, but actually increases the resources. And that's true. And then the second point is that we lost out to a pretty major grant that we went for, and we lost out for many reasons, but the number one reasons was it did not look like a collaboration. So I'm sharing this as very transparent with you. Those days do that.
Thank you. That is certainly very good advice and a good perspective for us to all have. So finally, unless there are any other questions, I didn't receive any others. So if you have a question, yeah.
This is kind of what is going through my mind. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived a charmed life. I think. And I grew up in these houses that sit off of Union Street. I don't know if you're familiar, where inside where Rockwell used to be. Single family homes, one floor plan, slab underneath of them. Moved back in there. I was 17 when my dad died. And I don't understand why don't people build those type of houses right now? That's my question. I mean, why are these contractors, you're going back to the business standpoint of things, but why aren't people buying, or instead of putting this, people aren't going to move into a $400,000 home.
Sure.
Those houses, the appraisal of my house is about $225 right now. I'm thinking, I wouldn't pay $225 for it. But it's like, that's their thing downtown. But, realistically, if you 100,000, 125,000, sell a home, and it's like, why can't people build homes like that to help this situation? And what's the follow-up?
I'll real quick, and I'm gonna do a quick synopsis, just, it won't fill in all the nuances, but a couple of things is that, we don't have as many developers as we did, as we boomed in the housing crisis. Because we don't have as many developers, is made the market itself increase in cost because you don't have the labor. And you don't have the developers, so the demand has concentrated into a very few. That is made in general then, that underlying lack, more scarce after COVID, because COVID has also been, had supplies fall out from under. So now you just have a loss of supplies as well. Again, cost has gone up, the people who are doing it have gone down. And so now what you're seeing is that the developers are only in the space in which they can make money. The space in which you can make money is high yield homes. What that means is that because they'll put a number that they just built in a home higher or an apartment, that means that what was naturally occurring affordable housing in your communities have now also gone up because it has to compete with the market. And then you have people who can't afford it. So it is the true reason why, and I'm just being around business, is just the capitalistic variable. Or when there's scarcity and when there's less, prices go up when there's a demand.
What do you think the answer is, though? What do you think? Stephanie says housing is first.
So I think there's,
What's the possible answer?
I'm gonna give an asterisk that I have no, I don't have any idea of really how to solve this, but I would say, here's how we try. Let me say why I'm saying I don't have an idea of really how to solve this as an asterisk, because we've never been here before, not like this. So give each other grace that you may affirm that you know the answer, but we really don't know, right? We're all walking through this, I think, very purposely together, trying to figure it out. So I need to say that. Sometimes we get a little kind of emotional. I think there's two things we can do right away. If you have underutilized property, what does it look like to put it into housing? If you have hotels and motels that no longer fit the market, what does it look like to turn it over and make it look like housing? If you have churches that have been given plots of land from people that went to your churches, what does it look like to have housing in the back? What does it look like to have not trailer parks in the way that we used to think trailer parks were, but what does it look like to have trailer parks that look different, maybe for you, or maybe for pregnant moms, right? So I think that we just have to reimagine the resources we have today instead of taking potentially a paradigm that worked for us, propositions that worked for us, and bringing it to the new.
Think outside the box.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a model we can all watch very closely in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. Homelessness, for sure. And there have been a multitude of ways that they've gone in and helped to solve the problem. Still haven't solved it, but they've done some things, like small houses that cost maybe $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. Why not? Second point, I could, with a little bit of time, list for you about 20 names of people in Licking County. If you go to them and ask, they'll do it. I know that from personal experience. In the early 80s, I was very active in United Way, was the 86 campaign director. So I know those people. Some of them are dead now, but their money's still here. And if you've got a plan that makes sense, the money's here. Witness. We're building a parking garage for whatever, I don't know, downtown, several $1 million. We're rehabbing an old bank building, which is fine, for several $1 million. We built the, what's it called, the science place down here for several $1 million from one man's money. There's money in this county, hundreds of millions of dollars. A lot of it from people that inherited their money from Park National Bank, for example, but there's a lot of money here. If you will ask, they will give, I guarantee you.
Sounds like the
I'll
campaign
go ask.
chair.
You know who they are. I don't have to give it, you know who they are.
I may or may not.
You know who they
You may
are.
or may not.
And I don't know all of them either. But if you've got a plan, and say, I need $100 million, within days, you'll have it. You ask the right people within days.
We can talk afterwards.
I wanna amplify that note. Couple things. When you see the communities that are moving the fastest around solving, it is not government dollars. It is private. So that, what you said is 100% right. It is private
Well,
dollars.
A while ago, you talked about, you said, we did this, and remember that? We started with Roosevelt, who was we? The government. And
Correct.
that's what happened. The government took over all this stuff, and everybody else bailed out.
Well, we know from the still experiment of Medicaid and Medicare, and I think we have a lot of things that have fallen out from that. So I want to give space to that. What we do know is it really did create, even with the GI Bill, the middle class. And
Well, I
it,
understand. Some of it was good. I'm not saying
yeah, it
all
was
of it was
good.
bad.
Yeah,
Some
it was
was
good
good.
for this country. And I'm not discounting in
Well,
any process is something that goes
But all
wrong.
I'm saying is that because the government stepped in so generously, churches, other organizations, individual money bailed out. Because the government was going to take care of it. And you talked about the money you've received. How much of your money came from the government? All of it, I'll bet.
For those
But you said you'd raised
60
X millions of dollars.
60% of our dollars comes from HUD, so the federal government.
There you
And
go.
then the other dollars, the 30, we have about 30% of
So
those.
the community,
rest of the
the
dollars.
community is not invested.
Yeah, I probably look at it a little differently, if you don't mind. I believe that our tax dollars should work for our community, and the tax dollars are nobody's but ours. And so we get to determine what works and what doesn't at any point in time. And you get to say it doesn't work, but we get to say that it
What I'm
does.
saying is, why, it shouldn't have gone there in the first place. It should
Well-
have stayed at home.
Well, you know, those federal tax dollars, I'll be right next to you if you say it's too much tax. We may agree on that one. But I do want to amplify that private is important. I also want to amplify that, and I spoke to Dan a little bit. If our youth aren't doing well, if our 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds can't live in this community in which we want to see, those private dollars will also be absorbed differently. It is imperative that we think about housing in the sense of, again, business, the value proposition of what is the succession of this community. You must have the basic needs of housing so that young people who graduate can come back home and live and build. You must, because private dollars do matter. They do.
But you know, right now in Lincoln County, if you want to buy a new house, a newly constructed house, you know how much money you're gonna have to have?
A lot.
$400,000.
A lot.
That's what they're, Horton Homes buildings out on, next to Country Club, now the new Country Club, out on East, Cherry Valley Road, $400,000. There's not 20% of people in Lincoln County that can afford that. My first house I bought in Dayton, Ohio, in a plot developed by a guy by the name of Huber. Huber Heights, it was called.
It is called Huber Heights.
It is Huber Heights. I lived there in 1962. I bought the house for $15,000. Now, I haven't looked lately, but I'll bet that house today is $200,000 or more.
Huber Heights used to be a working class community in Dayton, Ohio, and it is no longer that. It is a high-end suburb. Can I just say one real quick thing about the mini homes? We hear that a lot. What about small homes or mini homes or right, tiny homes? Couldn't hear that.
Dormitories.
The SRO, the old school SROs are still, I think we should bring those back, single room occupancies. Those single room occupancies came out of a couple of things. First, I make sure that men weren't on the street, YMCA, that was the main deal. But second, it went through the YWCA because women up until about mid-60s couldn't live alone. That's what SROs used to come out of. Also, we had immigrants coming in and they didn't have a way to go into housing, so we built housing to ensure that people were on the street all the way. But I love SRO, I think we should have it, bring it back more. But let me tell you really quickly, if you all are interested in mini homes, tiny homes, be real careful of this, which is why I'm not really a big proponent. Tiny homes are tiny and they cost very low, but when you break it down per square footage, it is the highest square footage of housing that you have in your community, which then drives up prices. So I want to just put that as an
The
asterisk.
dormitory idea,
But the dorms.
what I think about is the dormitory idea, there may be eight rooms on the side, the common room in the middle, the kitchen and that kind of stuff. That's what I think
Yeah,
would work.
that's our role.
That's my personal.
I agree.
Mhm.
That's our
Great.
role.
Well, I love this momentum of this conversation. We can continue going forever, but I do want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So let's give a big thank you to our panelists. Thanks to all of you as well. We really appreciate you coming to these events. We appreciate your engagement, and ultimately we appreciate your cooperation as we continue this conversation. So thanks to all of you. Feel free to help yourself to whatever's left over there and enjoy your Wednesday.